as we were watching President Trump, he really he spared no punches today. Critical of the UN, saying what is the purpose, but tremendous potential. The things he said were sharp, they were critical, but many believe that is exactly the message our president needed to deliver today. Fred, I'm going to start with you on the issue of Russia. I mean, we're getting to the point where the funding and the sanctions, this has to be the next step, because as President Trump even said that it makes Russia look bad. This is all very, very bad. Your take on how he was calling out Europe for funding this war for 3.5 years?
Well, I think he called out Europe and the United Nations, noting that empty words don't solve wars, that he helped solve 7 wars. He's doing his darndest to solve the war in Ukraine, but he can't stop this war if Europe doesn't help. If the U.S. is going to put tough sanctions on Russia, Europe has to do it also. Europe is still buying energy from Russia. What the president didn't mention is that it plans to keep buying energy from Russia until 2027. Trump finds that unacceptable. He wants Europe to help. He doesn't want European nations to swoop in and take trade opportunities with nations that the U.S. is sanctioning once we implement such sanctions.
He'll meet with Zelensky today on the sidelines. What are your hopes for that conversation, Ambassador Gilmore?
Well, first of all, I'm happy to be on with my friend Fred Fleitz, and he's right about this, and so is President Trump about a lot of this. We have to solve the problem of our friends and allies funding this war through their commerce with Russia. And I believe that President Zelensky and President Trump, if they have a productive meeting, can agree on that. And by the way, look, empty words, yes. I think that it's absolutely critical that the president at this point follow through on sanctions. It should not be a condition that all NATO countries participate, because some won't. The United States has to use its economic power together with its best allies to put pressure on Russia and destroy their war economy. That is what has to be done. And I would counsel the president to do that. One more point before I stop. I put a lot of thought about this because I was ambassador to the OSCE. The purpose of international organizations like this is not to run the world. They don't have the power to do that. But they can set standards. Right. They can be a forum for communication, both at OSCE and at the UN. So it's not completely pointless.
Let's talk a little bit about Gaza, the Palestinian state, and recognize it. President Trump very clear that he wants all the hostages, not 2 and 2. He wants them out. And he says it's basically, ignoring what happened on October the 7th. We have a little bit more of his comments right here. I'll play this.
As everyone knows, I have also been deeply engaged in seeking a ceasefire in Gaza. Have to get that done. Have to get it done. Unfortunately, Hamas has repeatedly rejected reasonable offers to make peace. We can't forget October 7th, can we? Now, as if to encourage continued conflict, some of this body is seeking to unilaterally recognize a Palestinian state. The rewards would be too great for Hamas terrorists for their atrocities. This would be a reward for these horrible atrocities.
I want to point out up next this morning will be Turkish President Erdogan, and he's been on the record, Fred, saying that it is atrocities happening in Gaza and saying, quote, I don't see Hamas as a terrorist organization. On the contrary, I see it as a resistance group, member of NATO. We expect his comments at the UN in a short time. We'll see what he says about this recognition of a Palestinian state. But it clearly is breaking with President Trump and Bibi Netanyahu.
Look, these comments by Erdogan represent his typical anti-Semitism and hatred of Israel. I just disregard them. They're nonsense. Trump is quite angry with European states for recognizing a Palestinian state now when they wouldn't recognize this before the October 7th Hamas atrocities. They are rewarding Hamas's terrorism. They're saying to Hamas, terrorism pays. Basically, the European states are saying, we'll recognize you, even though you're at war with Israel, even though you have not released the hostages. What Trump said is exactly right, and leaders of France and Spain and the UK and Canada, so many other nations, they should be ashamed of themselves. Fortunately, President Trump has Israel back.
Information. Truth is freedom. Is Newsmax. It's real news for real people.